May I?
Yeah, you can begin. Please begin.
Okay, so today we are looking at this essay, which seems to be like the first chapter of a bigger book, with multiple chapters. So, yeah, Taking Gendered Positions in Translation Theory by Sherry Simon. And this chapter is a part of Gender in Translation, Cultural Identity, and the Politics of Transmission, which is a 1996 book. So, this is the first chapter. So, before she delves into the concepts that she wants to discuss, what she does is that she tries to give a very brief summary of what all the chapters of the book discuss. And and it begins with the statement, that because they are necessarily defective, all translations are reputed female, which I find very controversial. I'm automatically triggered, but all right. And it begins with discussing how a translated work or translation in itself translate and all translations, especially the one they are so closely associated with anything female or feminine because of this inferior status of not being the original, of the status of not being the original. It is something that is derivative, something that is secondary. And she quotes another person saying who says that I am a translation because I am a woman. And in this entire chapter, we just go back and forth between this idea about how translation as a literary activity is associated with women, and it is often looked down upon in some ways. And we also discuss other things closely related to this. Now, what this like I'll try to be very brief about the summary that she's given of everything that she discusses in the whole book, which we do not have in our syllabus, obviously. But what she tries to discuss is that how does translation maintain these gender constructs? And first it completely it begins with this idea that because it is not original and it is not something. Basically, a woman who translates, or when a text is translated by a woman, or when translation is in a way, associated with women and is looked down upon, there is this whole assumption that the quality of the text that is translated somehow suffers. Also, that every translation is implicitly gendered. It is so every translation has it strongly shows how the gender of the person who's translating it, and that is how you can really make out. And that is also how, because in general we do not think of translations as original text or good text, and we often believe that a translation of any text will inevitably make you know its quality suffer and stuff like that. It is considered to be a feminine thing. And when she uses the metaphor of it, yeah, so there are very common metaphors associated with this idea, right? One is of property, where the translation, the text is, the authority and the mastery is with the actual author, while the woman who's translating it is just a tenant, or just someone who's, well, it's not hers. It's also the same with another metaphor that is commonly used, and that is of clothing. That it is the same. It is a person wearing someone else's clothes, and whether that's appropriate or not is a completely different question. That is not what she talks about in detail. But then there's this such a widespread idea that translation and women translating stuff, or women being in translation studies, or the works that are translated by women somehow suffer, somehow degraded. And we need to remember that she mentions a lot of these very famous writers who were translators primarily. For example, George Eliot, or let's say Afra Ben. And she mentions all these people just to you know, emphasize the fact that there were so many moments in history when translation was a very strong mode of expression for women because it gave them the chance to be familiarized with different texts and somehow introduce them to a different culture. And the way men and women translate text is distinctively different, ev- uh, even when they are not trying. And uh, she mentions how controversial the translation of the Bible, or just in general, all religious texts, is because of how men or women have translated them. And the feminist translations of the Bible, or the more inclusive language that now we see in the later or the more recent translations of the Bible, how they've played an important role in trying to level the plane for all these things. This reminds me of this recent post that I read. I wish I had saved it, but I don't remember. And it said about how the Bible became anti LGBTQ because of this one translation. It was an American translation. And the word, so there's this passage, right, which is talking about, well, sexual perversion. And the word, the Greek original, which loosely translates to sexual pervert, was actually translated by the translator to homosexual. And that was one of the few very, um, what should I say? I'm so sorry, I can't articulate. So it is all these small things. There was another example that I guess Sachinsa had one shared on his Facebook wall about how this class. I'm so sorry, I don't remember names. I wish I had saved all these. But the classics, when they're translated, and uh, wo- the latest translation of, I guess, the Odyssey, how it was believed to be a more accurate one because when men had translated those classics, they had there were some gender neutral, or there were some terms which did not exactly mean, for example, there would be some terms for, let's say, sexually promiscuous people, but they did not exactly translate to sluts and whores, right? And it is all these small things, and this is how, our vocabulary, and it begins with the word. Another important thing that she points out is how translation crosses borders, and how a translated work works differently in different cultures. And the most common example and the most effective example that she takes is that of the feminist writers, when the French feminists and their works were translated, and how they affected the feminist movement in America. Because, well, they had to, you have to culturally accommodate a translation, or you have to change the translation. You cannot just pick a word and translate it. So you don't write, you don't take a statement, find words which mean loosely the same, and then just juxtapose them against each other and translate it. Translation is not just about you know changing something word to word, but then the word Simon uses is transformance, or there is this whole transfer of ideas which has to be appropriate to the culture for which the work is being translated in the first place. So there will be times when something which is not so, let's say, which is not a very strong or not a very aggressive expression, it might have to be changed to something more aggressive or strong or sharp as an expression, only so that it has that desired impact for the audience it is intended for. So, yeah, the works of the French feminists were, when they were translated, and they affected the American feminist movement greatly. And that is one example that she, mentioned. Because this first chapter is more of a summary, and also the parts that I am supposed to present, they are also just a brief summary of what the entire book is. There's not much detail I can get into, or even if I get into, I have a feeling that I might just mess it up. So I will try not to. Yeah, so another thing that she talks about is the idea of fidelity. So fidelity is how close the translated work might be to the original text, or how close the meaning is to the original text. So when she talks about fidelity, she says that when women translate works, and when we rely on the conventional, the traditional idea of fidelity, we set these very rigid binary oppositions, and in the way that, um, okay, I need to articulate. Yeah, so because a work cannot be exactly translated word to word, like we cannot take two languages, choose a word which loosely means the same, or maybe means the exact same thing, but then it doesn't really have the same exact meaning as far as context is concerned. We cannot, we have to work with something that might be equivalent to it, and it doesn't entirely mean the same exact thing. Also, there are translators who have purposefully made these choices where they might have, so it might not be a feminist text, it might be a very gender neutral text, but there are people, there are authors and translators who have translated these texts something. Okay, can you hear me, because my earphones just disconnected?
Yeah, please, you'll have to repeat the last thing that you said.
um, okay, they're connected again. Hello. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, we
So
can hear
there
you.
have cases where translators have chosen, have made their obvious choice, and not in a misleading, not in a way to mislead or misguide the audience, but they've stated it, and sometimes even in collaboration with the author of the original text, they've translated these texts, which are not really feminist texts, or which are not really texts about women or talk about women, but then they've made it sound feminist, or they've made it about women, or they've completely changed the characters and stuff like that. And that also happens. Now, that might be misleading sometimes, but then she says that such cases are not really that high in number, also because there's this explicit intention which has been stated so clearly behind the translation. I guess we can permit that. And then we come back to um, the kind of responsibility that a translator has when he or she translates the text, and what amount of authority do they have on the original text. Because when someone translates a text, and especially when you're playing with gender, when you're changing so many things, there is this idea that now the translator is given just as much authority, if not more, than that uh, given to the author. And there is this shift of ownership, or let's say power or mastery over that text. And it is a matter of contention, right, to what extent this is acceptable or not. And this is this might be transgressive in many ways, and it's a matter of discussion. She doesn't give a conclusion, she doesn't pronounce a judgment, she just puts this forth as. She talks about three practices of feminine like she mentions von Pluto, who's another guy, Louis von Pluto, who discusses feminist translation, and who so this uh, literary figure, she mentions that the cultural and social context of feminism has a lot to do with the vigor and boldness of the translation. Okay, for the culture it is translated for. And she gives the example of Quebec and English Canada, and how some texts by feminist writers had to be translated with very with stronger expressions, with more explicit, more sexual, more straightforward expression, because that is what the culture needed in that moment and in that movement also at that time. And Bonflotto names and describes three practices of feminist translation. So they are namely supplementing, second is prefacing and footnoting, and third is hijacking. So supplementing is, well, the very basic process that each missing text is replaced with a corresponding text from another language, something we do word to word, where we translate word to word. But then sometimes when because every language has its own specialties and its own characteristics. Sometimes, for example, how do you translate a pun from one language to another without using words? Sorry, yeah, how do you translate a pun if you have to without messing up with the words used in there? Because not all compound words just work the same way into different languages. So there is a certain freedom that the translator gets when they want to play with the words involved, right? And then let's talk about prefacing and footnoting. So that's just a practice which gives the reader a more, I guess, deeper dive into the process of the translation. And preface, the statement in the essay is prefaces and footnotes draw attention to the translation process, and at the same time as they flesh out the portrait of the intended reader. I guess this is very self-explanatory, and that is the intention. And the third one, hijacking, something which I kind of sort of talked about before I got into these three processes, is when translations are changed, when she refers to the appropriation of text whose intentions are not necessarily feminist by the feminist translator. And we might discuss or decide for ourselves that how, which extent is this acceptable. And she the example she gives is a text in which where there were gender neutral terms, and she makes it a more feminine text, but she cares enough to mention that the author of the text of the text was okay with it. But what if they are not? And is it okay for the translator? I mean, it's a question for us, right? Is it okay for the translator to take such liberties with the text? But then again, it's a matter of gender, it's a matter of the power dynamic. And when we clearly know that the vocabulary that we use, the words that we use, play such an important role in establishing or reinforcing the power dynamic in the society, and how words have such a direct impact on the society and the culture they're practiced in. I guess such practices, well, they have a significance of their own, and we can't entirely come to a black and white answer whether these are appropriate or inappropriate. So, yeah, this is briefly my part of the of this first chapter of this larger book that I was supposed to. I guess that I will take it forward. Thank you.
Okay. So the cultural shift of translation studies in 1980s is what? It is the combined translation with culture. And hence it opened up a new perspective for the translation studies, and that is a new cultural perspective. The cultural turn of translation studies has made the public aware about political, social, and historical factors of the subject of translation. Hence, it has increased the attention of what? The paid status of the translation. Gender as an important part of the cultural studies has become a new and popular perspective of translation studies. Okay, so now I'm going to discuss about what? Challenge in grammar. Give me a second. Challenging grammar gender. Okay, so many languages of the world have a grammatical gender system that divides all the noun into gendered category. Say, for example, common gender divisions include what? Masculine, feminine, and neuter, also animate and inanimate stuff. There are three categories. Say, for example, determiners, adjective, and pronoun. So in French or in Spanish, female cat will be considered as he cat, and they are known as what? Ghetto. O is being added. And if feminine cat is there, then we can consider or call them as she cat, and they are known as get a. A is being added over there. So here there is some gender differentiation or say gender division that is being added. The gender assigned to a given noun requires gender agreement with associated items in the sentence, such as determiners, adjective, and demonstrative pronoun, as discussed before. So there are two main aspects of the languages that are being emphasized over here. That is naming strategies and grammatically gender marking. I have already discussed about grammatical gender marking. All right. So in over here there is one book, and in that book, the book's name is Evangelist. Sorry, book's name was Ugolin, if I'm not mistaken. Then it was being written by Locke, and there was one feminist character, Evangelist. She is a messenger carrying news within the institution and tradition of Western world. News were related to what? Patriarchy. Like news was having overwhelming influence of patriarchy. That is what it was being discussed. There is some sort of biting investigation based on sexist nature of the human knowledge. This novel uses satire, parody, allegory, etc. Here, the main focus in this book is a major part of the book covers that the French language basically plays an important role in the oppression of women. So there is constant insistence over here that social inequalities should be removed and patriarchal authority should be removed. There are few examples that were being given over here. One such example was that, if I'm not wrong, then it was there were 100 female cats who were walking behind the male cat. Okay. Apart from that, there were basic things or say basic questions that were being asked, that why are chefs male, and while most of the cooks are in this planet are women, uh, then why are males master and females are mistress, and why every time female have to wait for their male and have to serve for the male. So basically here attempt was being made that equality should be given and this kind of norm should be removed. Other practices of the language centered writing by the feminist is the use of technique and perception of modernism and postmodernism that is being investigated over the time. It was being said that writing is the most powerful thing that a woman should have. And uh, give me a second. Okay, so there was one question that was there that the question is, it is not surprising that the ideas and the practice of feminist translators have met with some or the other sort of opposition. Now what women should do over here is they should rewrite those things or rewrite or do translation that will broaden up their perspective, and they are writing or translating things of others, and that will help them out in some or the other ways. The principle of feminist translation are as it is being illustrated is always about what? Rewriting. What happens to the feminist writers? There was one question in the starting, that is, what happens to the feminist writers when she is faced with less writerly text or the worst text which are ideologically antipathetic to her? Or since the second question is, should translator focus on only on sympathetic text rather than antagonist text? So it was always being said over here that or say it was always being recognized over the period of time frame, that is, the translation is a way for the writers to gain creative stimulation. That is what it is. And now Sohan will take the charge.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah, go ahead. So
Okay. So the feature of feminist literary translation gives more attention to the politics of translation, like international feminist community cutting barriers of the need national identity brought concern for the work of translation. Example as women writing in India, Tharu and Lalita in 1993. Collection of writing was a result of the scholarly effort, and the second volume consists of mainly this translation from Indian language. Um, when the most of the translation valued the accuracy and readability uh, of editors of the anthology present in the precise analysis. This analysis focused on the problems involved. The criteria of judging a translation includes the fact of translation takes place where two invariable unequal worlds collide. So they have tried the translation to strain against the reductive and often stereotypical homogenization involved in the process, where it points to reader to take effort and learn slowly as she relates to the object of concern, the logic of the two worlds women have inhabited over years. As example, the contemporary in Hindi writers whose dialect having this earthly love diction, which it is untranslatable in the standard English. Also, they focus on the specificity of the source language of their text is also reflected in the other uh, failure recounted by the editors. They try to translate specific pronunciation of Indian words as they. Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So, as they exercise in the original language, but at the end, it considered as excessively foreignizing and confusing. So he said that what we had gained as a result of all this was a reader-friendly page that did not look like an Orientalistic test. What we had lost and what we are said about it was the variety of regional language, the desire to respect culture specificity takes out these Indian texts out of the Orientalistic tradition and reframe them in a new internationalism of women's writing. In chapter 5, Gayatri's work in politics of translation, post-colonial context imposes its own constraints on the translation process. She said that attention must be given not only to the gender aspect of exchange, but to the heritage of inequality inscribed into the very language of country. Uh, the historical dimension. She started by stating that contradictory pulls of different ideological pursuits in translating text, adding historical dimension on this question, introduces an additional complexity. During edition, Francois Kenny in 1994 collected and translated 18th century French anti-slavery writers of Olympe Gosses, Claire de Duras, and Germaine de Stael. Uh, in this series of essays, they foregrounded the issues of gender and race, questioning the position of both writers and the translator. Question on how translation should inscribe the her ambivalence of political activism and of this impact French women writers, as well as they contextualize the ambivalence, uh, the message which they deliver. And the question is that how translation to mediate between two historical moments which frame representation of race in the same way. So, as a as a reply, the editor of the volume, though progressively in the time, nourishes by what we now recognize as the Western condensation by exoticizing forms of cultural imperialism. Though most of the part acknowledge the delicate nature of this issue involved in that to vocalize the anti-slavery writing of this woman without imposing an uh, anachronistic grid on their work and textual intervention by translation. One highly original suggestion is proposed by the translator of Madame de Stael's Mirza. They suggest some of the exoticizing dynamics of the de Stael text could be more effective if the text were no more const- concretely grounded on the African reality. The translator introduced a new language, Wolof, rather than translating from French to English. They choose to translate French Volard, which considered the character represent would have realistically spoken. Also, they have restored the voice of characters whose ability to communicate was constrained by a passage through imperial language. Uh, Cord stitching. Cord stitching becomes a way of multiplicity in a text, governed by this universalizing modes of prestige. Translation positions marked only two in the relation to both historical and cultural understandings of cultural differences, presenting in original text than complex representation of language. As a double attention to gender and race, translations seek to uh, reverse effect of cultural dominance by using language to draw attention to pattern of oppression. The college strategy of supplementing in vocabulary provided by Louis Montfort, although the uh, open call of hijacking, like more than the historical integrity respect, text open to a plurality of language, which might well have been pleasing to the polyglot cosmopolitan idea. Ethic and um, plus translation subject. The question was, why is the strategy acceptable? And and as an answer, she says that no writer has forcefully answer discussed than Anton Bowman. According to Bowman, grounds for the evolution translation, one's ethical and poetics, the poeticity of text is defined by the translator's success in having created an aesthetic object. He says there isn't a particular mold for translation to fall into and no particular method which is obligatory. In his first book, Bowman suggests that there is no absolute focus for truth in translation. In his book, he took a position against this ethnocentrism in translation and criticized French tradition of derogatory translation. So when sorry,
Yeah.
when translation
done?
makes explicit no sir, when this translation makes explicit project to create this translation solution based on coherent aesthetic and ethical principles, translation can consider successful. Considering target-oriented and source-oriented, Berman argues that every significant translation is grounded in a project, in an articulated goal of the translator and by the specific demands of the work to be translated. Also, Berman points that the horizon, which is determine the parameters of the translating project. Uh, Berman exposed the create role of translation subject. He argues against the functionalist approach of polysystem theories who overarching this authority of the home to explain the interaction of translation with writing practices. According to Bowman, translation is more than passive relay, which the norms of the receiving culture are reproduced. Um, Bowman emphasized more on the power power of translating subject to formulate ethical and aesthetic goals. He recognized the translation project as a formative influence on resulting text. His outlook is constant with that of much feminist translation, theory and practice. When Bowman would agree with the feminist translators that the translating subject carries critical authority, he might not agree to the specific content which could be conveyed by the such authors. Uh, when also Bowman discussed upon the positions of translation subject, he he's not referring to the categories of identity, politics familiar to the Anglo-American milieu, but for the building of self-awareness of the translation within the domain of scripture. His call for the theory of the translating subject has this resonance for theoretization of feminist translation uh, as a subject of not confused by with person as a self-declared authority. Authority is grounded in the atemporal and the senses exploring him. They come to a conclusion like we can understand it as a outgoing relation of the translator and to her writing project relation and not a single predominated imperative which creates the condition of successful translation. So I just the essay ends and we are open for queries and questions. Thank you.
Yes. So questions, queries, difficulties, observations.
So I really like the part about women and calling them the translations done by women as something secondary, and then women themselves. I guess Preeti made that point of LGBTQ comes in, and when we also when we read uh, what's the name of? I'm so sorry, I'm not. Uh, I have her image in my mind, but I don't remember the name for some reason. But so she also talks about how we treat homosexuals as a copy of a copy and not the original. So this sense of not being original is already kind of inherent, and then when the translation shares similar traits. So translation done by a person like that, you can see how it would digress into a secondary thing. So yeah, I really like that point.
So what is the question or a point that you're trying to make?
No, that was just an observation that I completely understood that point very well, and I could relate. I could see it happening. So yeah.
Okay. Any other observations? Any other queries?
Sir, I wonder if this idea that a woman is a derivative or a secondary stems from the religious idea that a woman was created from the man's rib, right? So she was a part of the man. और तब से बस ये idea चला ही आ रहा है, चला ही आ रहा है. Her territory में in everything you just think the same. That a woman is somehow a part of the man and nothing on her own.
Yeah. So if you look at one of the tasks of feminist translation is also interrogate uh, sexism and stereotyping in the religious text like Bible, right? So Bible translation is also one of feminist translations of Bible is also one of the important domains of feminist translation theory and practice. That is what we have already seen, right? That is what Sherry Simon points out. Because religion plays important roles in upholding hierarchies and justifying them. Yes, so you are right. But according to other philosophers, it goes even deeper. See page number 10, last paragraph. Derrida has shown how recurrent opposition between letter and spirit, fidelity and beauty, come from a complicity between gender conception and writing, mimesis and fidelity. So that it is something which is fundamental to Western modes of thinking, according to Derrida. So religion being an expression of that. So the secondary status given to feminine gender has roots which are deeper than Bible. It goes back to the classical and pre-Socratic times. That is what people like Derrida have tried to show. Preeti.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Anything else? No other questions? All clear for everyone?
Sir, I have not read the essay, but does Simon explain why she takes this gendered position in translation? Like, is it really necessary to take this position?
Yeah, the presenters. What do you think? Preeti, Sohan, and Shraddha.
Could you please repeat yourself? I'm so sorry. I couldn't catch all of it.
Pardon?
So, whoever spoke, can they please repeat themselves? I didn't catch all of it.
Yeah, Rushi, can you repeat your question?
So
Rushi.
my question was, yes, sir. My question was that does Simon explain why she is taking a gendered position relating to translation? Does she explain why is it very necessary to do this?
Any three of you, all three of you can respond. Anyone can respond.
I'd say that she does because when she does, there's no clear statement as to if that was her intention or not. But I think she does. There's no other way she could write a whole book about it. And also because not, I mean, I understand that she, lays all these topics and different ideas and concepts before us with a relatively open mind and it's like an open-ended discussion. She does make it a point to point out how female, how translations by women have been, looked at or have been treated by have been treated in the literary world. And why it is so necessary to have a feminist, not a feminist, but why translations by women are so important, so significant,
But
and also
is this Preeti, is this essay only about translation by women, or
no,
it has?
no, no. It is. I mean, it does discuss other things also. Like it discusses how there are other ways also to
Hmm.
make any transgressions in translation. And she gives examples also, right? She gives examples of people with I do not want to mess up the name. I'll have to turn the page. Yeah, of the modernist writers of Brazil who tried to translate popular English literary figures and their works, and how it wasn't entirely a good practice the way they did it and stuff like that. I think she just wants to draw our attention towards some things and wants us to, and she emphasizes as to how these translations reinforce, or they play a part in the society directly, or how language in itself, and thus translations also play a part in how the society functions and women's place in it.
Yeah, Soumya and Dehini also want to say something.
Sir, I am not sure since I haven't read the essay, so I'm not sure whether she like states this, whether why it is important. But again, the fact that she is taking this up speaks for itself that gender, how it is being this part of our society, which is gender, how it is being treated when it comes to translations. And I feel that the basis of that is the question of derivative. So the fact that translations are treated as a derivative, and the gender norms that she is discussing, the with in respect to which she is discussing these translations, are also somewhat treated as a derivative. So what I think, she's just drawing our attention to the fact that while we do consider literary works, while we do consider the position of different sections of the society in literary works, when it comes to translations, how these same things function over there. And it does play a role in how we look at them, the translation as well as the gender. So I think whether or not she states it, I am not sure. But the question of derivative is why she has taken this whole thing up. So yeah.
Yes, Dehini.
So, sir, just like Soumya and everybody else, I also haven't read the essay, but I can take a guess that when this feminism as a movement came forward, it there was an attempt to look back and look at those texts, look at those practices which were anti-feminist. I think this can be one of those things of this can be like killing two birds from a stone, where she also positions gender and translation, both of these things which have been oppressed for many years, especially women. And translation is also something which was seen exactly how women were seen over the years. So it's a classic comparison of both of these positions, and also now how both of these fields are overlapping with one another, creating something new, something extraordinary. So the concept of derivative, as well as the fact that both of these, feminism as a movement and translation as a movement, both of these movements, especially in the West, came out as something of a, a response, or I would say a revolution against these fixed classical ideologies. And hence, maybe she's trying to create a comparison between the two, and she's trying to establish how both of these things and needed an upliftment, and there is a need to discuss these things.
So, Rushi, what is your take on this? What Soumya, Preeti, and Dehini have said.
So yeah, so I understood why we need to look at uh, the positions of translators and uh, the positions of women, and how both of them are very suppressed and oppressed in their respective areas.
Hmm.
So yeah, uh, but I still don't get it why the need to compare translator, and I'm not talking about women translators, but translators in general, to uh, a gendered position of women in society.
Yes. Would anyone want to respond to this question, that why should you compare it at all? And whenever we talk of comparison, we have to keep the idea of grounds of comparison in the mind, right? What are you trying to prove by a comparison? What is your claim that you're making through comparison, right? Yeah, Dehini, go ahead.
In this case, the ground of comparison could be how both of these things were oppressed in their own ways, and how they have revolted against the classic ideology. So maybe this is why this is a
Which is the classic
maybe
ideology.
I mean, the fact that how translation was something considered as an inferior practice, and also women and any other kind of gender was considered as inferior to the patriarchal norms. So both of these things are comparable on the grounds of these on this fact, and also how the concept of feminism has been rising again and again. So if we take a translation and compare it with that, maybe it will be easier for people to understand the position of translation, or vice versa. Yeah, that is something I
The position of women or vice translation, or what did you say? What vice versa?
So for example, if feminism was already there, so we can take the concept of translation, we can say how women were oppressed, and how translation as a practice was oppressed, and how both there is a need for both of them to get, uplifted. If I mean, I'm not sure now which came first. So translation आया कि पहले feminism. So I said vice versa भी हो सकता है.
But is there, do you think, any relation between the two? Apart from similarities and differences between two practices, do you think that there is some connection between the two? I think that is what Rushi is trying to ask, right? Yeah, Soumya.
Yes, sir. So why translation is considered feminine in the first place? Like,
Who
why do we
considers
associate
Ruchi,
it?
who considers it as feminine?
Sir, in the beginning of the chapter, I mean the essay, it is said that John Florio says translators are handmaidens to authors,
Hmm.
and
And,
Nicole Ward.
so John Florio says all translations are reputed females because they are necessarily defective. Right. So why does he say that?
Right.
Yes, so I guess that itself is the answer of Rushi's question somewhat, that so we do compare to get at a better understanding of something, right? And if you look at the key idea here, when you look at the idea of handmaidens, then I mean women, their position in the society is considered secondary. And similarly, the same thing happens for translation as well. And what we are trying to get a better understanding of here is what happens when a class of society which is considered secondary takes up something which is again considered secondary. So how their representation changes, that the representation of that work changes, done by a particular section of the society. So maybe here, the reason for comparison is to get a better understanding of that, of how,
Better understanding of what?
of of uh, of the representation of these works by women. So on the basis that both of them are considered secondary. So maybe that.
Okay. Yeah, Shraddha.
Okay, so here I would like to tell that I totally agree with the point of Dehini and Soumya. So as we have already read about the history of novels, right? There was one part where women were being suppressed and then they came into the limelight and what struggles they have had faced. So here the same thing came, we can take into consideration, that is females were being oppressed, and even in the grammar and other segments of the countries, there came a conflict, or say there was one thing that in French language, the language itself shows that how women were being oppressed, and there was one rule that masculines takes precedence over the feminine. So how the women face difficulties during the translations, and then what sort of things they did and how they came back. So there was just general observation about the masculine stuff, or say patriarchal norms, and then with the help of those things, or say the what sort of difficulties female face, they just came back and then they wrote a different story. So that is what it was being narrated over here. That is what I can suggest. You can correct me if I'm mistaken then.
Rushi, it's given very simply in the essay. DIO, I see that. Look at the first page. पढ़ते नहीं हो यार, यही basic problem होता है. Okay, so the first paragraph talks about how translations and women both are relegated to position of secondaryness, derivativeness, inferiority, right? So that both the paragraphs 1 and 2 talk about that. Discursively inferior position दोनों को दी जाती है, translation को और औरतों को. Not just that, आप जब ट्रांसलेशन की बातें करने लगते हो, you evoke gender. Like Le Belle Infidèle is a very famous popular saying, which means that if translations are like women, if they are beautiful, they are not faithful. If they are faithful, they are not beautiful. That is a very common expression, La Belle Infidèle, right? On page number 1. Now, how does all this come up? What gives rise to this? So she is saying feminist translation theory aims to identify the critique and tangle of concepts which relegate both women and translation to the bottom of social and literary ladder. So what are those processes through which women and processes through which translation maintains and activates gender constructs, right? Why does this happen? That whenever you're talking about translation, you evoke gender. And why does it happen that both of translation and gender are relegated to secondary status? So what is the connection between them? There is definitely a connection, because metaphors used to describe translation, like La Belle Infidèle, are evoked throughout. And the question of fidelity, right, loyalty, faithfulness, all these terms that are used when we think about translation are applicable in both the cases, in the cases of gender as well as in the case of translation. So why is there this similarity? Why is there a kind of connection? What connection is it? Right? And why it is there is what this essay tries to explore. Does that make any sense to you? Why do you evoke the ideas of fidelity, which operate in a double standard, right? If Shakespeare takes stories from Holinshed, then it is seen as sign of his genius. But if a translator takes text from somewhere else, it's seen as his lack of genius, right? And most often than not, translations are seen as not being close enough to the original. They don't have that fidelity to the original. So why is this expectation of fidelity put on translation and not on original? Is similar to why is this expectation of fidelity not kept on men? Why is it always women who are supposed to be loyal? And if man is not loyal, it is seen as a sign of manliness, right? And if women are not loyal, then it's sign of their depravity, moral depravity. So there are double standards for the same crime that men and women do. So similar double standards operate at the level of translation, right? So relation between translation and women has some connection, and that connection is what that essay seeks to explore, right? And that is the reason why she uses gendered frame to explore the question of translation. Does that make any sense?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Right. And secondly, translation was also used as a tool in feminist activist movements. Because, for example, many of you are exposed to the ideas of feminists like Hélène Cixous, Julia Kristeva, Simone de Beauvoir. Have you heard of these people in your women's writing courses, in your feminist criticism class? You have heard of these texts,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Now
Yes,
these
sir.
texts,
Yes, sir.
Hélène
Judith
Cixous,
Butler.
Hélène Cixous
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
and Kristeva and who else?
Judith Butler.
Judith Butler. No, I'm not talking of Judith Butler.
Okay.
I'm talking of Kristeva, Cixous, and Simone de Beauvoir. Why I'm talking about these three is because they are translated. So translating feminist text, say for example into Gujarati, right? When you translate Cixous or you translate Simone de Beauvoir into English, Gujarati, or Judith Butler into Gujarati, that is one of the feminist acts, yes or no? It's part of feminist activism to translate other feminists. Haan ya na?
Yes, sir.
So translation has played a
Yes,
role
sir.
in promotion of feminist ideology, right? That is another reason why you should explore relation between translation and feminism. Thirdly, all cultural practices, right? Whether it is storytelling or whether it is clothing and garments and fashion, or whether it is food, all these cultural practices cannot be thought of in isolation from cultural politics. That is what culture studies says. Yeah, right? Yes, no? Any cultural practice, whether it is filmmaking or whether it is cooking or whether it is drawing and painting or whether it is crafts or whether it is anything, any cultural activity, sport, marathon or what, right? What is the need to take a feminist position in looking at sports, right? Is it important to take a feminist position? Is it necessary? If you are going to analyze cricket, then does gender play a role in analysis of sports, Rushi?
It does.
It does, right?
Yes, sir.
So why should you not take gendered position in translation? इसका आंसर देना पड़ेगा. तू पूछ रहा है क्यों ले रही है, तो मैं ये पूछूंगा कि क्यों ना ले. What is the reason that she should not? Maybe that's where your answer lies, right? Why should she avoid talking about translation? Why should feminists not talk about translation? It's like that. When you say why should feminists talk about translation, I'm saying why should they not talk about translation? So what can be your answer? Rishi, why should feminists steer clear of a cultural practice called translation?
Um, Sir, I do believe that she should take, but if I were to argue against this uh, thought process, then I would say that uh, let's keep translation gender neutral.
Why?
That
Why? What
we
is the
should
reason?
discourage.
No, but what is the reason for that? Why should we preserve translation or see translation as politically neutral activity?
For the same reason as we should take any other cultural activities as gender neutral. For example,
Are there
sports,
gender
that we
neutral?
should.
Are there
No, they are
gender
not.
neutral activities, practices?
No, sir, they are not. But we should take them as gender neutral.
No, I still don't get
Like
your question. You are saying that all activities are not neutral, right? And then you say you should take them neutrally, but when they are not neutral, then there is already a politics at work, and you want not to engage with that politics, right? That itself is a political position. When you say
yes, sir.
that नहीं यहाँ पे फेमिनिस्ट लोग यहाँ पे मत देखो, ये हमारे क्रिकेट है, क्रिकेट में फेमिनिस्ट नहीं आना चाहिए, right? that cordoning or that segregation itself is a act of patriarchy and gender, right? So it is because people say that it is neutral when it is actually political, that you should point out that it is political. That is what cultural critique does. And when the cultural turn took place in translation studies, which she talks about here, right? Then all cultural activities have to be analyzed in the context of their cultural politics. Yes, Soumya and Astha.
So I do feel that what you're saying is right. Since the thing is that these fields, had they been gender neutral from the beginning, it would have been a different issue. But since they are not, so their representation is just as important. Because if you escape the question of gendered translations totally, then who would represent it? Because it is there. You cannot deny that.
Exactly,
So
it is there.
yeah,
So that is why you should talk about it. So
yeah.
if there is gender politics at work somewhere, and you have to talk about it. That is the reason, and that's why she does not go at great length, Rushi, to explain why she is doing it, because it is given that any cultural practice, right, will be embedded in cultural politics. That's what cultural studies tells us, right? So why should you wish that some areas should not be touched? That becomes a problem, right? And plus, it is so blatantly sexist to say that translation should remain faithful to the original like women who are beautiful are not faithful. So translations which are faithful are beautiful, right? Translations which are beautiful are not faithful. So when translation is faithful, it is not beautiful. That kind of sexism that is deeply, and misogyny, you may say, almost, right? Sexism and misogyny that is in people's thinking is seen when people start talking about translation. So it is very curious कि लोग इतने sexist क्यों हो जाते हैं when they start talking about translation. तो फिर patriarchy and gender और translation का कुछ तो contact होगा जिसकी वजह से लोग इतना blatantly sexist हो जाते हैं. या आस्था.
Actually, I was going to say the same thing that Soumya mentioned. But if we are, at all thinking that it should be neutral, but we as a society, we as a culture are not there yet that things can be neutral. Like whoever is oppressed needs to become equal. Then you can think about becoming neutral, right? So if right now also, like before feminist movements, it was not neutral, it was one side of the story, right? So if you, unless you don't see the entire picture, how do you say that let's keep it gender neutral? Like let all the genders come in the picture first, then you can talk about neutrality. So we are not there yet. We need to develop first.
Right. And plus, not just that, I may not take such a utopian position that one day everything will be neutral. Right. अच्छे दिन आएंगे जब all equality, liberty and fraternity, the ideals life may realize हो जाएंगे. That utopia may not exist. The revolutionary is utopia. But even then, you have to point out this disparity and this kind of sexism, stereotyping. And if you look at what Laurie Chamberlain has said on page number 3, right? She in her very important essay that was taught earlier in this course, I have included this because it takes a larger picture of it. Laurie Chamberlain says that there is, because both translation and women are concerned with reproduction, right? Not production, but reproduction. They have to be policed by patriarchy. So both women and translations have to come up proving their fidelity, right? And because of the fact that when reproduction happens, then motherhood is so easy to establish, fatherhood is almost impossible to establish in many cases. And that's why the whole policing of women's sexuality and reproduction happened in the patriarchy and capitalism, because property rights should go to the legal heir of somebody. So policing happened of women's sexuality because of capitalism and patriarchy working together. And it is the same thing that translation has to prove all time. Every time translation has to prove that it is loyal, faithful to the original, right? Because like act of reproduction, human reproduction, translation is also reproduction, and therefore it has to be policed and controlled by patriarchy and capitalism, right? I hope you get that is the whole argument which Laurie Chamberlain develops, and she goes on to say why sexism comes in when we start thinking about translation. So this is a new angle that comes up when we start thinking of questions of fidelity and loyalty and faithfulness that one expects from translation. Right?
Sir, could you please repeat the, sorry, sir, could you please repeat the last point you made? I couldn't understand it fully.
Yeah, so last point that I made was Laurie Chamberlain's one on page 3. She has argued, right, in her essay called Gender Metaphorics of Translation. she points out that both the activities of reproduction in people, human beings, where woman plays the most important role in reproduction, right? And translation is also a form of reproduction. Then the question of ownership comes up, which is what patriarchy and capitalism both want. Because patriarchy is what? It believes that the power and wealth should be concentrated in the hands of one gender, that is masculine. Now, translation is also reproduction, and woman also plays a role in reproduction and establishment of fidelity. To both this remains very important for patriarchy as well as for capitalism. Does that make any sense? What I have said?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think it was in the introduction of the first essay of Unit 3 as well, right?
Yeah.
He translate. There was this French. I only presented that. I am the two, but I forgot the name. So there was a woman who translated the text, and Gode and I'll just check it and tell. But like
Madame
there was a
Destai.
translation in French. Yes, there was a translation in French, right? And that was translated to English, not the original one. And that was
Right.
translated by a woman, Madame Dostad. So yeah, now it makes sense.
Patriarchy wants that the child of the woman, right, should be the child of the father. I hope you get what I'm saying. It is easier to establish maternity than paternity. And paternity is a very important issue in property as well as in patriarchy. Right? Property is the domain of capitalism, and property is also domain of patriarchy. So paternity becomes a very important issue. Okay? इस बच्चे का बाप कौन है, तो ही प्रॉपर्टी उसको मिलेगी और तो ही वो rightful heir माना जाएगा. Now translation is also reproduction, and that's why, like human reproduction, it has to establish its fidelity to the text, original text, which is considered as masculine. Right. So author is a father figure, and translation should establish that kind of fidelity to the author, the original text. So पैटर्निटी टेस्ट दोनों की जरूरत पड़ती है. ट्रांसलेशन की भी पैटर्निटी टेस्ट करते हैं लोग, और बच्चे के भी पैटर्निटी टेस्ट करते हैं, टू एस्टैब्लिश हु इज द फादर ऑफ दैट टेक्स्ट. एंड दैट इज द रीजन व्हाई, अकॉर्डिंग टू लोरी चैम्बरलेन, lot of sexism and misogyny enters discourse on translation. And she examines all the theories of translation, right from Dryden and Pope and other French authors, and right up to George Steiner. She examines this tradition of translation theory and shows how misogyny and patriarchy has crept into thinking and discourse about translation. And this is her explanation. ऐसा क्यों होता है? So why does women's sexuality is so policed? Is because of patriarchy wants that paternity, proof of paternity. Right? So we have overstepped the time, but anyone wants to say something about this conversation that we had today?
Sir, about the discussion you had with Rishi, Soumya, and Asta, about the gender neutral thing. Also, the fact that we have been discussing how translations, we don't see translations in isolation. We yesterday had a conversation and how we saw translations in the West related to its heresy and its historical relevance. Exactly. And then we saw translations. Exactly. Yeah, so like exactly. Leaving feminism out of it is out of question, because always everything, exactly. If we see everything has been gendered, has been politically politically gendered, socially and culturally affected. So
So you cannot, very true. What Pooja is saying is very important, Rushi. You cannot see translation in isolation from any other kind of cultural practices and cultural ideologies and historical context. Translation cannot be seen in isolation. It has always to be seen in the context of the social and cultural dynamics. That is what cultural turn in translation studies emphasize. Right? So how can gender politics be kept out if because that is an important context of any cultural practice. Right? So what Pooja is saying is also very true. You cannot see translation in isolation from any other cultural, social, historical contexts. But Rushi, it's good because you raised this important question. We had so clarifying this explanatory discussions, which would have definitely helped everyone, right? So everybody should thank Rushi for his question. How many of you are benefited by his questions and discussion that followed? Raise your hands. Right. So when one person asks questions, has courage to ask questions, it helps everyone. And that's why questions are important. Right. So good job, Rushi. You activated this discussion. Okay, so let's stop here. Anything you have to say before we stop? किसी को कुछ कहना है?
Yes, sir. I just wanted to add one last thing that I am not an anti-feminist.
No, I get that.
Anyone
I get
misunderstood
that.
me.
I didn't even imply that. And I don't think any person who responded implied that, right? You are asking it from an intellectual angle that what is the rationale or objective behind taking a gendered position on translation, right? That is what you want to know. And that is the reason why we had this discussion. It's not because you are critical of feminism or you reject feminism. Barabar hai? Nobody implied that. But that helps. So asking this basic question, this is what everybody should take away from today's discussion. Asking very fundamental, basic, even simple questions can help you in comprehension of these essays, right? The text discourses that we are dealing with. So like Rushi, everybody should ask these questions to themselves and in the class, even if they are pretty basic to, not a big deal. Means Sherry Simon takes it for granted, right? It's a kind of conversation between feminists, right? It's assumed. Yeah, Astha.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to lower the hand, but now that I've unmuted, I just wanted to say, like, it only shows that, you know, that we are trying to understand it from the very core of it, if we ask these questions.
Correct.
Yeah, it's a good thing, and I'm happy that I will participate because of this question.
Right, and you can see that you are thinking about translation that was in the beginning of this class, and thinking about translation today has shifted, right? It has started changing, right? So the next unit is going to be about that.
Because we always consider translation as a necessary thing. I mean, we don't really think about what translation.
Right.
We as in readers.
English educated Indians.
Yes, sir. We don't think about translation at all, right?
Indian literature, Rushi?
Yes, sir, I am.
So yesterday we had a discussion about this B. That the fact that translation is secondary or necessary evil is a concept that is alien to Indian subcontinent. It came through Western education to us, something that has become naturalized like rigid heteronormativity. That also has become is a kind of
Yeah,
gift from the West,
and
along with
taking it for
English.
granted.
Okay.
Like if we write a text, then it will automatically be translated by someone. We don't think about all these things that happen in
Politics of
between.
translation.
Yes,
First, we don't
yes.
recognize translation as translation, right? Secondly, we don't recognize the politics and importance of translation, both.
Also, the fact that in the first class of these of introduction to comparative literature, you asked us question like what do we think about translations, and most of the answers were related to the negativities of translations, like how it is away from original, how it is not very authentic. But now we have moved past beyond those questions. Is it like good or bad stuff? So yeah.
Good, good. So now what we can do from tomorrow, we can either start the new unit, or if you have queries from the third unit, you can ask me. ये दो हो सकता है possibilities. And third unit का मतलब ये है कि इस ऐसे में से भी अगर आपको कोई समझ में नहीं आया तो we can have a discussion on that, right? Or else we can go over to the next paper, and that is Andre Lefebvre again, Mother Courage's Cucumbers. So who is going to make a presentation on this?
Prutha and Richa.
Richa and
Prutha.
Prutha, okay. So I think you can start preparing so that tomorrow, in case people don't have questions because they don't read, or they think they read, there is an illusion of reading that may happen. Active reading में questioning होता है. Passive reading में आप just पढ़ते हो. So if you are reading actively, you will have questions, right? So tomorrow is a chance for you to discuss third unit if you have any queries, or else Prutha and Richa will make a presentation on probably one of the most important essays in this whole course that we are going to do. That is Mother Courage's Cucumbers, and that has become a kind of framework for many PhD translation projects under me. Right, one person is using these ideas to look at television refractions or television adaptations. One person is looking at how popular English fiction like Alistair MacLean or Tarzan or Jules Verne's has played a role in formation of vernacular popular. That means Gujarati में thriller, Gujarati में action, Gujarati में war novel, romance or whatever, adventure. ये सब genre गुजराती में कैसे बने, तो उसमें translation की क्या भूमिका है? Right, that is another project that people are working with me. So this essay has become very important for many PhD projects under me. So that is the importance of this essay, right? So tomorrow either we'll do that, or you can start discussing the questions, and if we are through with those questions, we can begin the presentation. Right, Richa?
Okay, sir.
Okay. So see you tomorrow then.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Have a good
sir.